Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He climbed up in the sycamore tree, for the Lord he wanted to see. And as the Savior passed that way, he looked up in the tree, and he said, Zacchaeus, you come down, for I'm coming to your house today. I'm coming to your house today. Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He climbed up in the sycamore tree, for the Lord he wanted to see. And as the Savior passed that way, he looked up in the tree, and he said, Zacchaeus, you come down, for I'm coming to your house today. I'm coming to your house today.
Amen. Amen. Zacchaeus was a wee little man. So that's one of the renditions we can use. That's not copyrighted. So that's why it's on there. But I'm assuming you can guess from the song what we're going to be talking about tonight as we go on this week. And the theme for this week is the thin line between a saint and an ain't. And tonight I wanted to do our Bible study on Zacchaeus. But before I do that, I want to say thank you for joining us. If you're a visitor here, thank you for being here and joining our broadcast at Newark UPC. Of course, if you want more information about who we are, newarkupc.info, and you can go ahead and learn about our small groups, our current project of trying to get things done. We're kind of out of our campus right now. It's being remodeled. It's going to look great. There's painting and all kinds of stuff happening there right now. So stay patient, and we'll be there soon. But while we're there, let's enjoy this beautiful weather, and let's continue to dig our wells and dig deep into the Word of God. And that's exactly what we're going to do here tonight as we look at this very fascinating character, colorful character named Zacchaeus. He seems like an anomaly. And what's fascinating about him is he only appears in Luke's gospel. He doesn't appear anywhere else. So Zacchaeus only appears in Luke's gospel, and we learn of him because of Luke. But I do want to look at that a little bit and look at Zacchaeus. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So give me 2 seconds here. Share screen. Share screen. Share. Perfect. There we go. Oopsies. I want to go to Luke. There we go. I made sure I made it bigger for you folks so everybody can see it. I know there are some of us in who have a hard time seeing, and I want to make sure that we can clearly read that. I am such a visual person, and I love reading things word for word and seeing it in front of me. I think it sticks better. I understand a little better, and also it prompts questions. Again, we are going to be asking questions 30 minutes into this, so prepared. Have your questions ready as we dig deep into this this fascinating character named Zacchaeus. Now, what is interesting is we're looking at Luke chapter 19, verse 1. But the previous section of the scriptures is talking about the blind man, the healing of the blind man in Jericho. And so here we see Jesus healing this blind man. The crowd doesn't care about this blind man. They just want to get to know Jesus. He is a walking, buffet. He's offering all kinds of food and games. And I mean, he was the place to be. So everybody just, he has his own posse, and he's got his own group, and everybody wants a piece of Jesus. And it's interesting, Jesus, even with the crowd and everybody trying to get a piece of him, he's incredibly intentional about where he goes and who he meets. And so he meets this blind beggar, and the blind beggar, of course, begs to be heard. And Jesus finally brings the blind beggar to him and says, "What do you want?" He says, "I want my sight." And God, of course, heals him, and Jesus heals him, and he's able to see again. And so he's continuing this journey, this walk, walking towards Jerusalem, because it's the crucifixion is coming here later on in the book. But here we see this before. But so here he is walking. He's entering Jericho. So we'll read verse 1. So Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through it. So he's passing through it. Now a man named Zacchaeus was there. Okay, this is important. A man named Zacchaeus was there. He was a chief tax collector. So it's interesting, that word chief tax collector is called, it's in Greek, it's archetelones, or chief tax collector. But what's fascinating, this term is a hapax legomena, which means it occurs only once in the New Testament. For some reason, Luke uses this term. So it's not that he's a tax collector, he's a chief tax collector. He's someone who organizes and manages, and they don't know if, some of the commentaries I was reading, they don't know if it meant that he was in kind of like in management, a supervisor of some sort, or that the volume of tax he collected was incredibly high compared to most tax collectors. And so he was a chief tax collector that way. So those are the two theories. I'm under the assumption that he probably was some type of manager, some type of supervisor, making sure that, keeping tabs on tax collectors. Of course, we already know a tax collector is Matthew, one of the disciples of Jesus. So it's not a foreign idea that here Jesus is going to go sit with he's talking and he's seeking this tax collector. So he was a tax collector and was rich. This is very important. He was rich. We just heard Pastor Stephen's commentary and teachings on the rich young ruler, where Jesus says, "Who can be saved?" And it's very difficult for the rich to enter the kingdom of God. And well, here's the contrast. So it's not to say it doesn't happen. It can happen. And here we're seeing someone where it does happen. And we're talking about Zacchaeus, this tax collector who was rich. And so here we are going to continue to read verse 3. He was trying to get a look at Jesus, but this is very critical here, a short man, he could not see over the crowd. He was a short man. We don't know how short. The average height around this time, based on Roman skeletons, was about maybe 5 feet, 5'5". So maybe just a little taller than Nick Horn. I'm not sure how short they were back then. But obviously Zacchaeus paled in comparison. He was probably shorter than all of them. And so he had a hard time looking over. He didn't have any type of ladder to look at Jesus, or any type of box where he could kind of step on, or he didn't have any of that. So the best bet would be to get a better look at him. He had to find a way. And what's interesting is the way the crowd is treating this person. So when someone says they're very rich and wealthy and powerful, it's a sign, this power thing. We see that's not the case happening here with Zacchaeus. Obviously, he looks like he's been ostracized, and nobody really wants to. Nobody really likes Zacchaeus. People just kind of avoid him. He's not that great to be around. Maybe he has a really bad sense of humor. But the obvious choice is he's a tax collector. So nobody likes tax collectors. Nothing has changed, right? But he's ostracized. Nobody likes Zacchaeus. And so he ran ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree. And so sycamores can grow up to 50 feet, up to 75 feet, sometimes even 100 feet. And they have multiple branches. And so here's this grown man And he is so curious about this Jesus. He's so fascinated about this Jesus that he's willing to look a bit ridiculous, climbing a tree just to get a glimpse of Jesus. To see him because Jesus was passing that way. He was just trying to get a look of Jesus. He wasn't trying to, have dinner with him. He wasn't trying to get an autograph. He wasn't doing any of that, or a picture with him, or a selfie. No, he just wanted to get a glimpse of him. He just wanted to see how he looked. He's heard about him. There was no television back then, so you couldn't see a person's image here. So he wanted to get a good look of who this Jesus is. Everybody's talking about this Jesus, this coming Messiah. Well, anyway, he passed through. And what's interesting, he was insistent to see Jesus, and he was going to do whatever it took to get a glimpse of him, even though it looked incredibly ridiculous. He was bent on seeing Jesus, and he wanted to see Jesus. And what's interesting is he has no idea that he's trying to catch a sight of Jesus, but that Jesus was there because of him. I think it's hilarious. He's trying to get a sight of Jesus. Nobody likes him. He's on the outskirts, and he's forced to climb a tree, and he's hoping to get at least a glimpse, and he has no idea that the reason Jesus is passing through this part of Jericho is because he wants to meet Zacchaeus, because he's being sought after. And isn't that just like God? I know I'm diverting here. We're talking about Saint Anne, but isn't that God? We always feel like we always end up somewhere. We must have ended up here by accident. Sometimes you have that thought. You're like, maybe this was an accident. Maybe it was a fluke. Somehow I ended up here. It's actually because of my parents. That's the reason why I go to church here. Or it was a friend or a friend, and really that's why. And we have maybe sometimes a hard time understanding that Jesus is incredibly intentional about meeting you, and he cares so much about you that he designs things just to get close to you. I think it's amazing. This God of the universe who controls everything literally strategically aligns things to get closer to you. It's not an accident that you're here. It's not an accident that you're watching this broadcast wherever you are. And it's not an accident that you are part of our church, or this is your first time listening to us. You're here for a purpose. And here we're seeing Jesus was very intentional about going through Jericho, and he was intentional about meeting the Zacchaeus. And what's fascinating is Zacchaeus had no idea what Jesus was doing. He was just trying to get a glimpse of this superstar, of this Jesus. And so he climbed ahead. And when Jesus came to that place, so I'm in verse 5, and he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down quickly, because I must stay at your house today. Zacchaeus looks to see, but doesn't realize he's being sought after to be saved. He is being looked at. And that's sometimes the challenge, is when we get a little too close to Jesus, he kind of sucks us in, doesn't he? But he had no idea that his curiosity of Jesus was going to change his life forever. He didn't realize that salvation was at his door that day. And he didn't know that what he thought was his purpose and what he thought he was going to be doing would take a completely adjustment and a realignment to what God had intended for him. And Zacchaeus, I'm sure he was probably shocked. I'm sure the crowd was going, who? Are you serious? That guy? But it's not just that he said, come quickly, I must stay at your house. This isn't a come down here, I want to shake your hand. Come down here, I want to go ahead and sign your little Torah or whatever it is. He's like, I'm going to stay at your house today. That's a big deal, right? Coming to somebody's house. Hospitality is huge in this culture. When someone comes into your home, you protect them, you watch over them, you're going to be hospitable to them. Hospitality takes on a whole new dimension when you're dealing with ancient Near East. So he came down quickly and he welcomed Jesus joyfully. He was excited to see Jesus. He wanted to meet him, and he was so excited that Jesus was going to come and he was going to stay with him. I'm sure people thought, what is Jesus doing? But here he is. He's coming down. Watch this, verse 7. I love this. And when the people saw it, they all complained. It seems like the crowd that hangs around Jesus always seems to be complaining. Have you guys ever noticed that? He's always like, and the crowd was like, oh, that guy, or oh, that's the blind Barnabas. Why do you want to go to that blind man? You know, it seems like this crowd. Seems like a very nice crowd. Definitely not Jesus. This crowd, I don't know what this crowd is. It's a crowd. These aren't disciples. These are crowd. This is a crowd, right? There's a difference between a crowd and a disciple. And they complain. He has gone in to be a guest of a man who is a sinner. He is becoming a guest. Again, remember, hospitality is massive here. You don't just go sit and eat with people. We talked about some of the Jewish customs of, being unclean and, keeping your kitchen clean and kosher and, making sure you don't touch people's Tupperware and plates because it could be ceremonially unclean and they'd have to go and be watered and ceremonially cleaned by a priest. And so, there's all these little, you just don't go into someone's house and eat. Okay. There's all kinds of protocol, and it seemed like Jesus didn't follow any of it. And so here he is going to go into this man's home. But Zacchaeus stopped and said to the Lord, watch this. This is what Zacchaeus does. He says, look, Lord, half of my possessions I now give to the poor. And the way these tenses are, this isn't a one-time act like, okay, it's like a big, missionary service. Here's my check. All right, that's the end of it. Goodbye. No, this is a continuous thing. And I'm sure it really didn't affect him that much because he's so wealthy, but he's going to give half of it to the poor. And remember, with the rich young ruler that we saw Stephen talk about, he didn't want to give anything. It would have been interesting if the rich young ruler, who was a saint by all accounts, who had the look and the pedigree and the what you would consider to be someone of a disciple and a saint, and really there was still something he was missing, drastically missing. And when Jesus calls that out and says, give everything you have to the poor, he walked away sorrowful because he had many possessions. And he didn't even come back and say, well, Jesus, what if I give a half of my things? Or Jesus, what if I give 75%? Or Jesus, what if I get like 10% or 20 or 30%? No, he didn't even make any suggestions. He just walked away, and he didn't say yes and see what Jesus' reaction would have been, but he just walked away. But it's fascinating. Zacchaeus here, this sinner, this one who's this small, short, greedy, money-hungering man, by all accounts, somebody you don't want to hang out with, somebody you wouldn't invite to your house, or you would go to his house. You'd avoid this person. You'd walk on the other side of the street. He is not only invited by Jesus and he become a guest in his home, but he's willing to give half of his possessions to the poor. And this isn't just a one-time occurrence. He's going to continue to do that. I give half of my possessions down to the poor. And if I have cheated anyone of anything, I am paying back 4 times as much. Now that is very generous. Very generous. What does the law talk about restitution? And what does the law talk about if you cheat somebody and what you give back? Well, let's look at Leviticus 6. And this is Leviticus. We're looking now here at the law of Moses. And the law of Moses gives a very clear about what restitution you can give to somebody if you've cheated out somebody. And here we're reading the first 5 verses, and it kind of Moses kind of explains to the Israelites of what that looks like. So then the Lord spoke to Moses. When a person sins and commits a trespass against the Lord by deceiving his fellow citizen in regard to something held in trust or a pledge or something stolen, or by extorting something from his fellow citizens, or has found something lost and denies it and swears falsely concerning any one of the things that someone might do to sin, and when it happens that he sins and he is found guilty, then he must, watch this, return whatever he had stolen and whatever he had extorted, or the thing that he had held in trust, or the lost thing he had found, or anything about which he swears falsely, and he must restore it in full. So if you steal $50, you have to give $50 back, and then add 1/5 of that. 1/5 of that. So let's just say $100. Someone steals $100. You give them back $120, because 1/5 of $100 is $20. So here we see that's what is required. That is what you do. Zacchaeus goes a step beyond that, actually multiple steps beyond that. And he says, I will pay them back 4 times as much. So we see Zacchaeus has this conversion. Salvation has come to Zacchaeus. Now there's an argument saying, well, is this vindictive or is this salvation? Which type of story is this? Was Zacchaeus always righteous and Jesus went to him? Or did Zacchaeus change because he invited Jesus into his home, because he allowed the Lord to eat with him? Boy, there's a whole sermon in that, right? Allowing the Lord to eat with you and how that changes you. But to me, the way the scriptures read is, and he says, look, Lord, half my possessions I now give. So it's not like he was previously, but he's becoming a changed man by meeting Jesus. And if I've cheated anyone of anything, I'm paying them back 4 times as much. He's willing to take this to a whole nother level. Whoever's been cheated. So if someone's stolen $100, if I've stolen $100 from somebody, I'll give them back $400, not $120. No. I want to make sure that I keep my integrity. And I think that's very, very amazing here that Zacchaeus is being that much influenced by this Jesus. Verse 9, then Jesus said to him, after he said this, then Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this household, because he too is a son of Abraham. So this is it's a reminder to the crowd that yes, this tax collector that you guys are ostracizing and don't want anything to do with, he is also a son of Abraham. He's also part of the tribe. He's also an Israelite, and he deserves to be given salvation. He deserves that. If he's willing to change, if he's willing to put things aside and to follow Jesus, and if he's willing to make things right, I think that's a powerful thing. We don't know if he cheated people in the past. But he says, if I have, I'm paying him 4 times as much. And I don't think this is lip service. I think Jesus would have caught on to this. He was very clear at catching this with the Pharisees, and he was very clear at catching this with some leaders. But he sensed Zacchaeus' heart, and he sensed Zacchaeus' intentions. And Zacchaeus was not trying to just do this for the crowd's sake. He really, really wanted to do this. He really wanted to give half of his possessions to the poor. And then to restore those he has taken advantage of, or if somebody, and again, my view is that it's a supervisor. If one of the people he works for, that works for him, or who's part of his network that has mishandled somebody, then we'll restore 4 times that as well. So, and it's interesting, salvation comes to his house because of that. He gets close to Jesus. And for the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. So Jesus has come not to, he wants to save all. I think that's kind of our mission statement, right? All, making disciples of all. And that is so crystal clear in the scriptures Nowhere do we see that it's particular to any particular segment of the population or some geographic location. If anything, Jesus releases geographic location. He says, you can release Jerusalem. I don't care about all that stuff. I dwell in people now, not in temples made with hands. He's releasing us from geography. He's releasing us from having to go to a single place and do some type of a journey or a pilgrimage. No, he's saying the pilgrimage can be done right in your home. The pilgrimage can be done inside your car. The pilgrimage can be done at your workplace. You can go ahead and see this Jesus, and he is intentional, and he is always reaching. He's always moving things around. He's always doing all kinds of strategic things just to get your attention. And here you are climbing a tree, trying to look down to get a better glimpse of him, and you have no idea that the reason he has showed up here tonight is because he was reaching for you and he wants to be part of your life. That's the God I serve. He is incredibly intentional. He's always reaching. But how we respond. Now, that's the difference between a saint and an ain't. A saint responds to Jesus. A saint listens to Jesus. A saint reads the scriptures and sees the clarity of principles and begins to apply it into their life. An ain't does not. An ain't says, that's not going to work for me. I'm going to ignore that. It's one thing to ignore something because you don't understand it. It's another to ignore it because it doesn't work with your personality. Ooh, I'm just going to ignore that part of the scripture. No, it doesn't work that way. When you invite Jesus to have dinner with you and he sits in your house and you extend hospitality to him, you start changing. Things start moving. God starts bringing things to light and God starts working in our lives. And that's how God works. That's the difference between a saint and an ain't. And here we're seeing this entire crowd angry that Jesus has picked Zacchaeus. That Jesus, it's time to spend this one-on-one personal time with Zacchaeus because he's an ain't. From their perspective, he's an ain't. Everything on the surface is an ain't. But deep down, there's a saint there. There's someone who is willing to listen. There's someone who really does want to follow Jesus and his teachings and his principles. And so here we are, this Zacchaeus, this wealthy tax collector who gets a hold of Jesus gets a hold of him. I think that's pretty hilarious. He has no idea what Jesus was doing there, and he thought he was just part of the crowd. But that wasn't the case. Jesus was coming after him in a good way. We are going to be coming close here to 7:30, so I do want those of you who have your questions to preface them with question, and then ask your question, and we can kind of talk about that. So just to kind of give you a heads up, you do have a couple minutes to do that. Zacchaeus, on the surface, looks like a short, greedy, money-hungry man, but he was not. He was a saint. To the deliverance there of a man lost in blindness and poverty corresponds now the deliverance of a man who is lost in wealth and corruption. The popular support for the former is to be contrasted with the popular dismay of the latter. And that's John Nolan, one of the commentaries I read on Luke. And it's talking about the contrast between the blind, poverty-stricken man and this wealth corruption man. And there's this very, very contrast that Jesus reaches both. He doesn't just reach one socioeconomic segment of the population. He reaches the entire socioeconomic of the population. He's reaching for those who are willing to listen, those who have ears to hear. And it doesn't matter if they're in poverty or incredibly wealthy. At the end of the day, everybody needs Jesus, and everybody wants to, have their life restored and have their relationships restored, and we can provide that for them. By the way, congratulations to our brother John, who got baptized by Keith. That is so exciting. I just find it so awesome that we're doing this on a broadcast and, and online, and people are being touched by that, and we're kind of mobilizing ourselves as we're kind of having a year of digging our wells, and a year of putting things together, and internalizing what God wants for us, and then now we're acting on it, and it seems like God's just kind of preparing His church here. I'm excited for what God has in store for us, church. I really am. I think God's got something out of His sleeve here. I'm just bracing my hat. I'm just making sure I get plenty of rest as much as I can with the 10-month-old, and I'm ready to go. So we're going to see what God has in store. But yeah, so here we see God is reaching for the all, and we have to be careful we don't judge a book by its cover. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. But yeah, so we have to be careful we don't judge a book by its cover, and we don't know. We have no clue. We can't read people's hearts. We can't read people's intentions. We don't know who is willing to hear what Jesus has to offer. And I mean, I'm always shocked on who comes following Jesus. I'm like, who, they? But that just goes to show you, I'm not God, and He is, and I'm just going to trust Him, and reach for the all, and not judge a book by its cover, because people that look like ain'ts are potential saints. So it is question time. I do want to go ahead and invite Erica back. And then Erica, I know we've given about 5 minutes.
Yeah, we got a couple.
We got a couple good. We got a couple of questions. So go ahead and shoot away with the first one.
Considering the fact that we have a hard time discerning who is a saint and who is an ain't, how should we treat people?
There is Pastor Lil, just kind of, she's onto this. She knows what she's talking about. We need to treat all people with respect, and we need to demonstrate that we're disciples. We're not disciples just in the church building, but we're disciples in our home. We're disciples in our workplaces. We're disciples in the grocery store. We're disciples wherever we go, and people should recognize that we're disciples. And so, yes, and we need to be careful who we treat poorly. We shouldn't be treating anybody poorly, because we don't know. We don't know where people are, and God dealing with them. God, I remember when we see people walk into the church, we think it's not their first rodeo. It's not like have never talked to God. God's been dealing with them long before they show up at the church or show up on our broadcast, or God's works with people long before we see them. And we have to be careful, just because somebody is crabby and mean and short or from the appearances looks to be full of money hungry and wealth. And it's funny because Zacchaeus kind of reminds me of like the Wolf of Wall Street, this guy who just sells a bunch of stocks, and he's eating avocado toast, and he's like this very power hungry guy who is trying to make all kinds of money on Wall Street, and it's like Jesus walks by and says, I'm going to go ahead and go to your house and have avocado toast, and they do, and it changes that person's life. So I think we have to be careful we don't begin to discount who would want to hear this and discount who Jesus is talking to. I think that limits our diversity and who we can reach, but it also limits what God can do. Because you'll be surprised. And I think Zacchaeus is such a great example that just because you have affluence and wealth doesn't mean you don't need God. I work in a community that is completely, very affluent, and I can tell you right now that all their lives are a mess. They need God. They, kids, have, the opioid crisis. I read about that. I didn't realize the impact of that until you start putting faces to it. And people are, their lives are messed up, and we could be that light. We could, our example, our conversation, how we carry ourselves. People recognize there's something different about you, the way you treat them with respect, and the way you care for them like they matter. Because again, at this church, just to kind of harp on our theme is it's always about people here. We're about people, and we're about everyone. We care for the single person, the individual. So I hope that answers that question. But yes, we should treat everyone with respect. Period.
Lots of people feel as if they're too ain't to be part of the church. How can we help them to understand that all of us saints are ain'ts just like them?
Good question, Caleb. Yes, I think people. It's so funny. People go to church and they see you all cleaned up, and they, for some reason, think you have your life all together. And I don't think social media has helped with this, because we tend to put up our best, and we put all the fun stuff we do, and our happy pictures, and they don't see the struggle, they don't see the fighting, they don't see all that goes behind the scenes. And really nobody has it together. We're all completely reliant on Jesus. And I think being transparent with people, we want to be real and not fake. Being real. I mean, if somebody, you're always like, oh, I'm so blessed and everything is perfect all the time. That's not true. Everything is not perfect all the time, because you do have your bouts when you deal with whether it's, I don't know, the depression, but loneliness, or you're struggling, or whatever it might be. You have all that. Again, I'm not saying be too vulnerable and break privacy about yourself, but we do need to be transparent with people. And I think when people see that, how real you are, and that you also struggle just like they do, and you're always trying to strive for what Jesus' example is. I think they'll see that it's between them and God. It's their walk with God. It's not, and really the key to this question is, we like to compare. Well, I can't be like you because you have it all together. And that's not the case. It's your job. You're not trying to compare yourself amongst yourself. This is an individual journey. Yes, you're relying on the body. Yes, they need to keep you accountable, but the measuring stick is between you and God, and everybody has a different measuring stick, and some people get things a lot quicker than others, and that's okay. That's the part of the all. Is you're going to get people who it just clicks for them. They get that oneness of God. They get the idea of salvation. They understand living in separation, and it just becomes part of them. And some people it takes a while, and just being okay with that some people they're getting closer to God. They're making a commitment to Him, and as long as you get closer to God, and as long as He's influencing your life, then in the end, you're going to come out right. So, yeah, definitely.
If the heart is deceitful, how can a person tell if they're a saint or an ain't?
If you're asking that question, then you're a saint. If you're asking, am I a saint or an ain't? That means you're being introspective, and you're willing to step back and make sure that you're not coming off too judgmental. Most people are not. Most people are not judgmental. They really do. They really do care for others. And as long as you're aware of what motivates you, and you are aware that your heart is deceitful, and that really the reason you're doing what you're doing is because of Jesus. I mean, Zacchaeus I'll be frank. Zacchaeus, he gave half of his possessions to the poor. I don't know if he would have done that if he didn't meet Jesus. He said, I will go ahead, and if I've in any way wronged anyone or in any way have cheated anyone, I will go ahead and do 4 times. And, we see in the law that it was only, it was only 1/5. But here Zacchaeus takes it a whole nother level. I don't know if Zacchaeus would have come to that conclusion if Jesus hadn't impacted him. And really the key here is fruit. It's about people's fruits. What are those fruits? Long suffering, kindness, joy, peace. Now those are the fruits that we look at. And so, yeah, we do need to be introspective and see, are we being truthful with who we are, and how is God influencing our life? So, and it's a beautiful thing. It's an ongoing relationship. This doesn't happen overnight. I doubt Zacchaeus was just like, boom, all right, I'm done now. I can just go back and instantly he just changes. No, I'm sure it was something continuous. It was a process. We don't hear about him. Just because we don't hear about him doesn't mean he wasn't there. But we don't hear about him again. Just that one account from Luke. But I'm sure he did become a saint.
Zacchaeus appears to be a product of his society, yet doesn't the fact that he uses the word "if I have cheated anyone" show he had a moral compass already with Jesus?
Yes. Yes. And this is the funny thing about this passage is people don't know if, well, there's 2 schools of thought. Let me put it that way. One school of thought is that it is a salvation story about how Zacchaeus, salvation comes to him through Jesus. And another school of thought is it is a vindictive story where everybody treats him terribly, but really deep down he's a righteous man. Yes, he says, if I've cheated, I think in some ways he probably did treat people right. But again, as we read the scripture, he says, now I will give half to the poor. And so he's kind of changing that. He's because of Jesus, he's doing that. And yes, if he's cheated people, he's willing to give them back. Yes, it does show somewhat of a moral compass, but really it's when he meets with Jesus that he really is fully changed and kind of moves forward with that, in my opinion. So you could argue it either way. If you really want to get meticulous, you can look at the tenses, the participles, and whether there's a future tense or present tense. They're mostly present tense. You could argue a couple of the verbs could be future tense, and it's talking about the future. Which, if it is future sense, then of course it is a vindictive. So, but yes, it's 2 different schools of thought. I'm leaning more towards Zacchaeus. I think Zacchaeus was changed. When he met Jesus, he changed some of his behavior. Maybe not much of his behaviors, but he did change some of his behaviors.
It's interesting that this account is only found in the book of Luke. Do you have any insights about why this might be?
Yes. My thought process is Luke loves to bring these outsiders, and he is he's one of those gospel writers who likes to bring all the fringe people, and I think it's intentional. Luke is trying to show that Jesus reached for everyone. And it's that's the beautiful thing about the Gospels. There's 4 of them. Each one has kind of their own purpose. Mark is this kind of this emotional gospel, and Matthew is kind of this Jewish and making sure it's always going back to the law gospel, and John is this kind of spiritual gospel, and and just kind of this goes into more of a theological view of Jesus. And then Luke does kind of the human. He's kind of a humanitarian here. He shows Jesus's human side. He's reaching out to the vulnerable, to the ostracized, the people who are the outcast. Zacchaeus wasn't a man of power. He was an ostracized person. No one wanted him to be around. And so Luke wanted to show Jesus going for people like this. And I don't think he's making it up. I think these are just all these multiple stories that the gospel writers have to pick because they can't write everything. And for him, it worked out really well because here he's talking about the blind beggar who's in complete extreme poverty. And then here Jesus is reaching this very wealthy individual. So and they're both ostracized. They're both on the fringe, but they both receive salvation because Jesus reaches for all. Now, and I want to say that's kind of the impetus for Luke. He's trying to show that Jesus is really, not only just to fringe people, but he's reaching for all, and that everybody needs Jesus. So, and if you read, and what's fascinating also is if you go back a little further, that's where the rich young ruler is. So it kind of contrasts the story. He's like, not very many wealthy will get in there, but then he talks about Zacchaeus, who is incredibly wealthy. And so again, it's just showing, it's the individual, and we need to be reaching for all. And it doesn't matter, if they're in complete poverty or they're in complete wealth. It doesn't make a difference. Everybody needs a hold of Jesus. So I think that's kind of Luke's purpose there. Good question. That's a good question.
Did Zacchaeus have Roman citizenship?
That is an excellent question. I will check that out. Hold on 1 second. Did Zacchaeus have? That's an excellent question. Zacchaeus have Roman citizenship? We know he was a Jew. And most of my reading didn't talk about him being a Roman citizen. So that's the reason why they hated him, is because he was actually a local guy. Hold on 2 seconds. That was an excellent question. Just looking at my resources here. There you go. That's a good question. So from all accounts, from what I'm reading right now through my resources, is that he was not. He was definitely one of the children of Israel, and we don't know what tribe, but he was a son of Abraham, and that's the reason why the people didn't like Zacchaeus and they called him a sinner, is because he was working for the empire, and the Roman Empire, not Star Wars, but he was working for the Roman Empire, and he was collecting money for the Roman Empire. That's kind of how they financed their armies, their road building, is they collected taxes. And so they used local people on hand. I don't think he had Roman citizenship. Again, we don't know. We don't know too much about Zacchaeus. He just kind of shows up. He's this chief tax collector, and he's very wealthy, and that's kind of what kind of ends it off the story at. So I don't know. I don't know if he was a Roman citizen or not. That's the fair question. I don't know. My assumption is he wasn't, but he was a Jew. Good question.
When we go about our everyday lives, how can we make sure that we don't come off as being too saint to people? How can we help close the gap with people that feel they are too ain't to ever be saint?
Too ain't to be ever be saint. You want to be authentic, but you also don't want to change who you are. I mean, at some point, there's a fine line. It's a fine line between authentic, being kind, and treating everybody with respect. It's another to join in on whatever they're doing that you know is wrong. So I think we need to be authentic to that we're authentic in the sense of we're real. We're not. It's not like we're not putting a fake front up. That we're honest with people about who we are, but also that we're also not, trying to think of a good term here. That we're not. I don't want to say lowering ourselves, but that we're not changing our convictions because it comes off too offensive to them. So it's a fine balance, and balance is hard for us humans. We are not balanceful people, and there's a balance between making sure that we stay true to the scriptures, but also that we treat people with kindness. And so if someone says, "Oh, you're too saint and you're a holy roller," and if you just kind of got rid of some of your convictions, then then I could relate to you more. Then no, that's not what we want. We don't want people to step down. We want people to step up to what God has for them. And so it is a balance. It's a balance. And if and at times, to be frank, at times it's people feel convicted when they're around you at times, and so that can come off as, well, you're being too sainty, and that's not the case. They just feel convicted around you. You're careful with what you say. You're full of integrity, and you have these convictions, and so and sometimes people don't like that. They it bothers them, and so you just kind of have to feel it out and just kind of let the Spirit lead you. But it's a balance. It's a balance of being authentic, being kind and real, but also not lowering yourself where you're throwing your convictions out and you're just doing whatever they say. So that's not the case either. So you can do both. You can be kind and still have your convictions. And people at the end of the day will respect that. They will respect that. Yeah.
Was Matthew hated as much as Zacchaeus?
Yes, Matthew was hated as much as Zacchaeus. Matthew, they did not like Matthew. Matthew was a tax collector, and Jesus always gets dinged by it. I mean, every time he's with the Pharisees, like, what is a tax collector doing here? So yes, Matthew was just as much hated as Zacchaeus, but Zacchaeus was a chief, so he was a step up. He's kind of the manager here, and so he was probably hated even more because this guy, he has an organization, a network of people, grabbing money and from these poor people and giving it to this empire that is suffocating them and telling them what they can and cannot do. And so, yes, Matthew was just as much as hated as Zacchaeus, but Jesus still told him to follow me. You're going to be part of my group here. You're going to be part of the 12. So I think that's very intentional on Jesus' part, is that, again, that's another great one, Matthew. It doesn't, it looks like an ain't, but really is a saint.
So far, that's all the questions we have.
Awesome. Well, thank you for all those questions. I do want to kind of go over, if you want to have more information about who we are, you can go to newarkupc.info. You can partner with us in giving. It's very straightforward. You can also partner with us in prayer. We do have small groups are online. It's through Zoom. We actually have the link, and you can click on it and go. It's on Failed Expectations. And it's just been an excellent series. And I might be a little biased, but I think it's been done really well. We did a play about the Shunammite woman, and And I really enjoyed that. Talk about a story sticking in your mind when you have to act it out. And so you don't know what we do in these groups, but it's a great time to look at the word. This is a word-based church. We are all about the scriptures. And so it is great. You get to meet with people and you get to know who they are. So please stay connected to our small groups. And if you have questions about anything, please, there's a comment section for that. But thank you so much for being with us tonight. And I'm so glad that you were here. And I pray that you have a wonderful day, and looking forward to seeing you folks tomorrow as we continue this awesome theme of a line between a saint and an ain't. So thank you so much. Enjoy the beautiful day, and God bless you. We'll see you tomorrow.